This is a story about jealousy. Doug Hopkins was born April 11th, 1961 in Seattle, Washington, but he grew up in Tempe, Arizona. People who knew Doug said that he was funny, he was talented, he was good at skateboarding. He was more than just a personality, he was a force of nature. But Doug struggled severely with depression and mental health issues. One way he found to deal with this pain was to throw himself into music. He played guitar and wrote songs obsessively. There wasn't much of an alternative music scene in Tempe in the 80s, so Doug basically started one. He was in a bunch of different bands until finally in 1987 he started a new band with a friend of his from high school named Bill Lean, who would play bass, and a friend of theirs named Jesse Valenzuela, who was originally the lead singer. They went through a couple different drummers and a couple different rhythm guitarists. Eventually they added this rhythm guitarist named Robin Wilson, who they decided would be better as the vocalist, so him and Jesse switched places. The band was influenced by bands like Cheap Trick, The Church, The Replacements, and R.E.M. And pretty quickly they started getting a big local following in Tempe. They were playing almost every night of the week and people would come to see them religiously. These shows were often pretty chaotic because the whole band drank a lot. In fact, the name of the band was a reference to drinking. They called themselves the Gin Blossoms. Even though Robin was the lead singer, it was clear that Doug was the leader of the band. Doug, Robin, and Jesse all wrote songs, but Doug was the primary songwriter.
Most of the material we do are Doug's songs from about 2 years ago. So we just need to get him kicked in the ass. Jesse and I have both been writing a lot this year, and that's a nice deal.
In 1989, the band decided to record an album. They went into Whipping Post Studios in Tucson, Arizona, and recorded an album that they called Dusted.
There would be no beer during the sessions, and that edict lasted, I'd say, about 30 minutes. So we were it was recorded and mixed in 6 nights, which is fucking unheard of. It's a stupid way to do it. And
we've only mixed it once.
Yeah, and we did the best we could with limited resources, limited funds, and limited intelligence.
It was released on a small Arizona label and was really popular with their local fan base. But then the band started expanding outside of Arizona. They played showcases at South by Southwest in Austin and CMJ in New York. This led to a lot of hype, with one publication calling them the best unsigned band in America.
Tonight, the featured band hails, still unsigned, so heads up you jaded suits. From Arizona, the Gin Blossoms!
So then major record labels started coming to Tempe to try to sign them. Doug was against signing with a major label. He didn't trust them, he didn't want the band's sound to be changed, but the rest of the band didn't want to miss out on the opportunity. So they ended up signing with A&M Records in 1990. And things get off to a pretty rough start. To produce their first album, the label brings in Albie Galutin, a producer who was most famous for his work with the Bee Gees. He had produced the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. The producer and the band did not get along in the studio. There was a clash of ideas. They found that they couldn't recreate the spark that had been on their first album, Dusted, and everything fell apart in a month. They had just wasted $100,000 trying to record an album. The band convinces A&M to let them go back to Arizona to record an EP instead. So they go and record this EP called Up and Crumbling that's released in 1991. It's not a huge success or anything, but it gives the band another chance. The label agrees to let the band choose their own producer, and now they're going to get one more shot at making this album. They go to Memphis to record it, and they record it with this guy named John Hampton, who had worked with some of their idols like Alex Chilton and The Replacements. But these sessions are also something of a disaster, although this time it's because of Doug. Doug's drinking by this point had gotten out of control. He was using it to self-medicate because of his mental health issues, and he was spiraling fast. He didn't want to cooperate, he didn't want to record any of his own solos. The producer John Hampton said it was like trying to record an album with Nicolas Cage from Leaving Las Vegas. Finally, since Doug was in no shape to complete the album, he left Memphis early. They had to douse him in aftershave and mouthwash to cover up the smell of alcohol just to get him on the plane back to Tempe. The band finished the album without him, but now they were facing the prospect of having to try to promote this record with a dysfunctional band member. There was an internal debate in the band. Some wanted to fire Doug, some, like lead singer Robin Wilson, wanted to give him one more chance, but ultimately it seems like the decision was made by the label. So in early 1992, Doug Hopkins was fired from the band he had started. In July of that year, the first single from the album was released, but it was a failure. When the record was released, the band gave it a fitting title based on what they had just gone through trying to record it. They called it New Miserable Experience. The rest of the band, with Doug's replacement, went out on the road and toured. Meanwhile, Doug was back in Tempe trying to put a new band together, a band he called the Chimeras. The band got a lot of buzz locally, but eventually he would end up sabotaging that band too. Doug was pretty angry about getting kicked out of the band. He would give interviews telling people that the band ripped him off and stole royalties from him. This is something, by the way, that the band has always denied. At one point, Doug saw Robin Wilson at a show in Tempe and went up and punched him in the face. Everybody around Doug could see that he was destroying himself. But things started getting even worse in the summer of 1993. That was when, almost a year after New Miserable Experience had been released, the Gin Blossoms started becoming successful. The first single from the album, the one that had failed, was a song written by Doug called Hey Jealousy. It was written about an ex-girlfriend of his named Kathy, who had broken up with him in large part due to his drinking. There was actually originally a line in the song that said, "You can trust me not to drink." But singer Robin Wilson changed it to "You can trust me not to think," something that Doug was upset about, but Robin said, "We can't have references to your drinking problem in every song." Hey Jealousy had been one of the band's earliest songs, going back to that original album Dusted. They had re-recorded it for New Miserable Experience, and the label really believed in it. So they released the song again. They recorded a whole new music video for it, and this time, it started to become a hit. By October of 1993, the song entered the top 25 in the Billboard charts. Doug got a gold record for writing the song that his friend said he hung up for about 2 weeks before one day smashing it in a drunken rage. As mad as Doug had been about being kicked out of the band, now he was seeing them have a hit with the song that he wrote. Then the band had another hit with the song Found Out About You, which was also one of the songs written by Doug. His drinking and depression got even worse, and he started talking about suicide. His friend said it was something he had talked about for a long time. He kind of romanticized it. Robin said he had even talked about it back when he was still in the band. So everybody that knew him was heartbroken, but not that surprised, when on December 5th, 1993, Doug Hopkins died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The album New Miserable Experience would go on to sell 4 million copies. The band tried to continue on without Doug. They had a hit with the song Till I Hear It From You from the Empire Records soundtrack, and in 1996 they released their follow-up album. The name came from the two things they heard most often after the success of their previous album and the death of Doug. Congratulations, I'm sorry. The album did well and had hits like Follow You Down, but the band was being torn apart. Robin and Jesse were fighting, they were without their leader, and in 1997 the band broke up. Gin Blossoms have since gotten back together, they still tour, they've made new music, but they're probably best remembered for their hits in the 90s, especially those songs written by Doug Hopkins. Decades after Doug's death, he still looms large over the band. They're still asked about him all the time in interviews. Lead singer Robin Wilson said that he still thinks about Doug all the time. He thinks about him whenever he's singing the words that he wrote. When an interviewer asked him if he ever got sick of talking about Doug, he said no. Doug certainly deserves to be talked about. He's a major part of our success. And he's our friend. And he should be here.